Look, I didn't want to make this video, but I felt compelled to. Honestly, I sat down planning to make the opposite of this video. A video praising Ghost of Yotei, talking about all the bold new directions and the fresh protagonists. But somewhere between writing those notes and hitting the record button, something clicked. Every single strength people keep praising Ghost of Yotei about is actually the reason it falls completely flat, and you gotta hate it. And today, I'm gonna give you 3 of the biggest reasons why Ghost of Yotei completely sucked. And why even its good ideas backfired so hard that the entire experience becomes bland, predictable, and emotionally hollow. We're talking about a protagonist so undercooked, she somehow undercuts her own story. She's not medium rare, she's so undercooked, she's frozen. Graphics that are technically better, but only artistically. Gameplay and pacing so boring that even the big emotional beats feel like absolute filler garbage. But before I break down the first point, the protagonist, I want you to think about this. What happens when a studio makes every safe choice dressed up to look like bold ones? So let's get stuck into this. So the first biggest reason I want to talk about is the protagonist problem. Atsu. So why Atsu doesn't work. And when I say the protagonist is the biggest issue, I mean this in every possible, imaginable way, that a character can fail. So here's the thing. I wanted to like Atsu. I genuinely did. The trailers made her seem grounded, raw, and human. A character with a different emotional weight from Jin Sakai. But that's exactly the problem. Different doesn't mean better. She's completely different and not in a good way. So Atsu has no real drive. You can have a revenge story. You can have a reluctant hero. You can even have a character who's meant to be flawed and conflicted. But you can't have a protagonist who doesn't really know who she is, doesn't commit to her own goals. This was the problem that let me down the most. She doesn't grow. She just kind of wimps out. So the story has no meaningful direction. Atsu's revenge motivation collapses halfway through the story, and not in a satisfying character-driven way. It's not an emotional arc. It's not a crisis of identity. She wanders through missions like someone who forgot why she got out of bed. And if the protagonist doesn't care, then why should I? The other thing is that she has zero emotional presence. And Atsu isn't stoic and cool, she's just empty. There's a difference between a quiet hero and a silent void. Jin Sakai had weight. Aloy has weight. Even characters who don't even talk that much, who basically have monosyllabic grunts, like Sam Porter-Bridges, they radiate personality through their subtle reactions, through the storyline, through this kind of give and take and emotional waves. But what did you get from Atsu? Basically nothing. A flat tone effect. No charisma. No spark. No sparkle. And she reacts to tragedy like someone politely listening to the weather forecast. The doesn't feel like a hero issue is actually bigger than you think. Because when we talk about physical presence, and I'm not talking about attractiveness, I'm talking about physical presence, a protagonist needs to be there, to be cool. You want to play as them. It doesn't mean they have to be hot, although sometimes that helps out, but someone who commands the scene, someone whose body language communicates confidence, conflict, vulnerability, something. They need to be hardcore. And Atsu plays like the devs intentionally tried to design the anti-hero, anti-heroine like someone that everyone's gonna like, but they ended up with someone who's completely forgettable. No one's gonna be talking about Atsu's story next year. They're still gonna be talking about Jin Sakai. And sometimes I just genuinely wonder, do I even want to play as this character? This is what actually set me off in the first place. So honestly, when I heard the rumor that the girl from The Boys, she wanted to play Atsu, I was gobsmacked. You know, she would have been so good at it. She's cool. She's hardcore. She can carry all that emotional depth. She fights really good. She could have carried burden, weight, and she plays a character who barely speaks as well, right? So instead, we've got a protagonist who feels like the shadow of someone interesting. I was waiting for so long for it to get interesting. And there's no character arc to really latch onto. Atsu doesn't grow. She doesn't break. She doesn't build or rebuild. She just moves forward, kind of plodding along, like someone going to the supermarket. So it's not a journey I really wanted to take that much. But don't get me wrong, the places were cool. The idea, the revenge story, that is awesome. That is gold dust. But she had as much emotional depth as a wet paper towel. But my point is, it didn't need a better protagonist. It needed a protagonist, an actual one. Okay, enough. Let's get on to the second problem, which for me were the graphics. And it's not that there isn't an improvement over the last one. There is. It's noticeably sharper, cleaner, and from an artistic point of view, it's incredible. It's beautiful. Everywhere you look is like a wallpaper for your phone or for your desktop. That takes artistic direction. But when we look at Death Stranding 2, when we look at Expedition 33, we can see a clear difference. We can see something that has emotional depth and not just a wallpaper, not just a background. Something that really becomes part of the story. And in the first game with Jin Sakai, you really felt like that wilderness was part of the story. Whereas this time, it does feel just like a background. And I think they could have made the graphics better. Like, when you look at Death Stranding 2, that looks better. It's just awesome. And it doesn't even employ ray tracing, I think. You know, again, it's just artistic design, artistic choice. So the marginal upgrade from Ghost of Tsushima to Ghost of Yotei doesn't cut the mustard. And in this, I'm also including stiff facial animations. The characters basically had really poor lighting the whole way through. You know, if you compare the characters when you talk to them to something like even Horizon Forbidden West, they just look terrible. Completely flat. They look like a PlayStation 4 game, early days. The game was boring. So Ghost of Yotei should have been exciting. It takes everything from the first game and it adds to it. More world, more story, and ninjas, the kitsune. But the combat isn't stylish. We've had things since then where the combat looks incredible, especially things like swordplay and gunplay. Again, we can look to Expedition 33, we can look to Stellar Blade. Those games are crunchy, they're hardcore, and they feel good to play and to watch. This game, again, it just felt very meh. And I can't be doing with it. I need a game that's addictive, especially when I'm going to put my hard-earned time into it. And I bought this game day one. It was pre-ordered. So I really was relying on this game being, super addictive. I wanted to take this to the platinum level. You want to watch a spectacle. You want to make your moves cinematic. And again, you want to feel like you want to be that character. So there's no emotion in this story. There's not a protagonist you can get behind, and there's not cool, crunchy graphics. And it didn't have to be over the top. It didn't have to revolutionize the wheel. They just needed to take the original a little bit further. Make this game cool. It's boring. Basically, that's what I want to say. So that's the end of my rant. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I thought the game was great in many aspects. Like I said, it had a marginal upgrade on the graphics, had a renewed protagonist, a new story, a new place. All those things I commend it for. Loading times off the chart. Awesome. Really nice to play like that. But when it comes to style, when it comes to wanting to be that character, and some of the other things I mentioned, do you agree? Do you disagree? So let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.